Hello, everyone. Welcome to this day of information on the deregulation of the passenger rail network organized and operated by the Île-de-France Mobilités Authority after buses, after the Grand Paris Express. Let's take a look at the whole of the Paris region railway network. We will spend a few hours together in order to focus on several items and questions that you may have right before the deregulation. We are in a hybrid meeting here. Some of us are in the building of Île-de-France Mobilités. We are, of course, abiding by the health measures, and there are some of us here in this building, and there's also you who are watching us remotely. Of course, you can ask questions in a written format as we are giving these presentations. And at the second, for the second part of this session, you can also take the floor. You will use the raise the hand function in order to ask your questions. So in just a few seconds, I will give you the exact agenda of this afternoon. We will have several presentations focusing mainly and progressively on the conditions of the deregulation of the network. But before we start, I would like to give the floor to the General Direction of Île-de-France Mobilités, Laurent Propt, who really wanted to kick off this meeting to talk about the Île-de-France Mobility's perception on this deregulation. Laurent Propt, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to introduce and to present this information day. There are about 100 of you signed up or present today to take part in this information session on the deregulation of the rail lines for users in Île-de-France. The interest of this project is it's very important for us to do this, and we wanted to make this day a moment of exchange where we focus on the operators and also the candidates for these different lots. The diversity of the operators that are present today is something which is very pleasing for us in our approach. We have already organized some information days for the deregulation. This was for the Greater Paris area, and there are several calls for tenders that have been launched. This day, in particular, shows our willingness to really drive this deregulation in all modes possible, in full respect of transparency and fairness. For us, this transparency and fairness is absolutely vital to the success of this deregulation process. Now, liberalization or deregulation, you probably would say it's new for us, but not really, because we've already implemented that, particularly on the bus network. I'm going to come back to that later, but today for us, deregulation it's a tool. It's not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. We're opening up the market to competition, and it's going to allow us to really sign contracts between the organizational body or the authority and operators. Today, the tool is in a bit of an exception in Île-de-France because it's only reserved for a few new services in the bus network. We did that in 2017, 2018, but not so much, not very extensive. This deregulation now today is a European obligation. It has also been done in almost all other major French cities, and there have been operational contracts signed after calls for tenders. And in the world, you know that this rule of deregulation or liberalization is widely used today. Today, it's a European obligation, and that's what made us, in fact, have this major shift in our approach. And this is translated into the regulations that are in force today, with a specific timeline, which is progressive. In 2021, we're going to have to open up to competition all of the wider Paris area networks. And we have already awarded 8 contracts in that scope, including 3 which actually came into force at the start of this year. We also have to do the same for the new tramways, for example, these new services which are going to be commissioned in April, in a few days now, in fact, and that also was subjected to a call for tenders, full deregulation. Then the wider bus network for the Greater Paris area, as of today, is something which is about 800 million euros of turnover per year. So it's a huge call for tenders. And this has allowed us to set up a process, a tendering process, which is very professional, with a full organization between specialized teams in legal, contract, procedural teams, and also the technical teams who go through all the details, and all of that assisted by private external consultants who are there to help us drive these call for tenders from a financial and technical point of view. In 2021, first major step is the bus network for the wider Paris area and also the tram lines. These are train trams and all train lines, which represents a turnover of 2.5 billion euros per year, so it's quite significant. We also have the obligation to deregulate the Grand Paris Express network, and that will be the end of 2024. We also have line 15 of the metro, which will be in 2025, and also line 18, which will arrive in 2027. These are calls for tenders which will be driven by us at Île-de-France Mobilités. Line 15 actually has already been launched. Buses in the Paris region, that's the inner Paris region, will be privatized as of next year and be operational in 2025. The existing tramways will be privatized in 2030, and the metro is 2040. But I'm just focusing a little bit now on the rail lines, because the process starts in 2023 and finishes in 39. So it's progressive. The philosophy behind this liberalization is we're not doing it just for the sake of competition. We are doing it in order to bring everybody into a real audit of how the network works so that we can improve this network. The first objective that we actually set was to make the contract holders who are already in place, to make those contract holders and who have given us full satisfaction, but so that they would actually need to bring improvements to the existing networks, and they might not have done that if it hadn't been completely liberalized, because they will be challenged, of course, by input from external suppliers who will also bring their solutions to improve the quality of service. From our point of view, what we want is more service for the travelers, the commuters, and to have a network which works correctly, which is more on time, more reliable trains, more dependable trains. Now, but that's not the only objective, obviously, of the call for tenders. It's important. What's important is to have a network which is just fully operational and works. What I'd like to tell you today is that I'll ask you a question, in fact. Are calls for tenders going to be really open? Are we going to succeed, in fact, to have candidates who will be able to submit correct offers? Now, we know it's going to be a long process. It's going to be long for us internally. It's going to be long for the tenderers as well. But the first lots, then, are going to be human-sized lines, which is going to make it easier for any potential bidders to quantify and to approach this whole process. And we're going to do it progressively from our point of view as well. We're not going to try and do everything at the same time. We're going to go step by step. We can't do everything in 2023. We have an absolute necessity to start progressively and to go at a respectable pace with SNCF Réseau, who is the operator of the network at the moment, in order to get all the information, all the data that the tenderers will need in order to be able to quantify and submit realistic offers. These are all the subjects that we have in mind as we build the process from day to day, in order to have procedures which are completely accessible to everyone. In Île-de-France, and this is an important point that I would like to highlight, in Île-de-France we have a transport network which is very dynamic. The economy of the region is very dynamic, and therefore the transport network follows that dynamic nature. Since the beginning of 2016, we have an increase of 3% in traffic per annum. So we have to increase the offer continuously. It has been planned with all of the calls for tenders in Île-de-France to expand the offer by 2 billion euros. And this will go to 12 billion euros. So we are in this dynamic of increased services. And there is space for everyone. It's a little bit like in Germany, when it was done on the rail networks in Germany. What we're going to try to do is going to follow the German model, where we have an improvement of services, more offers, more resources, and also new operators who have been able to get into the market. And with the Deutsche Bank, which was very effective and dynamic in that whole process. And that is our model. That's the one we would like to follow, to liberalize the market for regional trains in Germany. Now, I'm not going to keep you any longer. I'm going to hand over the floor to Gilles, first of all, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Laurent, and thank you for setting the scene for today and for giving us a bit of context on this deregulation of these rail lines, for the incremental opening up to competition. I would like to remind you that we have simultaneous translation because some of you do not necessarily understand French. We have people from all over the world who are interested in knowing a little bit more about the way that the largest authority in Europe is preparing for this deregulation. In the two coming hours, we are going to give you a little bit more details based on what Laurent Probst just explained. We're going to talk about the lot award scenario. We're going to look at the calendar, the time frame. We'll see how lots are opening up to competition. And to do so, I have Corinne Montmory next to me. She's project manager of the call for tender of the Transilien network. Thank you, Corinne, for giving us a presentation about the context in terms of railway transportation in the Île-de-France region. But more broadly, you're going to explain the way that everything is embedded in a more global momentum. We also have Marianne Macney with us, who is part of this project team. You are in charge of transportation offer and network interface. And this shows that the infrastructure itself is a vital element as part of the deregulation of the network, because we're really working and looking at the management of infrastructures between the different operators. That we, thanks to this organization, we will have the success of this deregulation. We are going to start, as I said earlier, with a progressive approach in terms of deregulation. But I think that it would be interesting to take a look at the transportation context in the Île-de-France region. Corinne, as I said earlier, we have a lot of people online who may not know the Île-de-France region as much as operators or other stakeholders that are used to working in France and with French stakeholders. So I think, especially for our foreign audience, it would be really interesting to give us a little bit of context on the public transportation situation in the Île-de-France region.
Yes, so I'm Corinne Montmory. I'm the directress for Île-de-France Mobilités. Just to complete or to add some information, I'd like to talk to you about the context, in fact, the global context, and the organization and the mission that we have at Île-de-France Mobilités. And also for the regulation and the legislative context in France in general. So I've got 3 points in my speech. First, on the mission of Île-de-France Mobilités, a little review of where we're at the moment for the Grand Paris Express and wider Paris region, and also a little reminder about the legislative context for this deregulation. So, Île-de-France. Île-de-France is a very specific region. It's 12 million inhabitants, 20% of the French population, more than 6 million jobs. It's the first or the leading employment area in Europe and represents 30% of the national GDP. So what does that mean in terms of travel? It means that there are 41 million daily commutes, including 8.5 million, which are done in public transport. And we also have 46 million tourists per year. Another point that we need to take into consideration and to have in mind is that it's only 2% of the national territory, and that there is huge discrepancies, territorial discrepancies, between dense transport networks and then lighter areas that are not so dense. So we need to adapt the offers, the transport offers, to the characteristics of these different densities. Also, a little bit of specification on all the figures that we have today. These figures are figures that come from pre-COVID times. So what are the missions of Île-de-France Mobilités? Today, Île-de-France Mobilités is an integrated organizational authority with jurisdiction over all modes of transport on the territory of Île-de-France. Its main missions are, we reminded you of these, but here they are again. These are missions that actually have been added to over the course of time. So there are many missions today. Today, as it stands, the main missions are, first, the definition and organization of public transport. That's the main mission. The acronym that we used to have has changed over time as well. But we also have another mission, which is the contractualization with all operators that run these networks, and also for buses, for example, in the wider Paris area. There's monitoring of the activities of these operators. There's a significant mission of planning of mobility. There's also the development of new mobilities, and that's a new mission that we have in Île-de-France Mobilités. You can speak about carpooling, car sharing. You could speak about bikeways. You could speak about roller-based transport or self-driving cars. The self-driving cars in particular is actually undergoing experimentation at the moment. We also do some research and planning in order to, with the region, in fact, and through finance, between the region and the state. There are negotiations to actually input resources into that. The idea is to, of course, modernize and develop the network. And then we also have a mission to organize the intermodality of the whole transport network. And of course, all of these missions need to be done whilst ensuring a balance, a financial balance, and sustainable financial balance. So who runs Île-de-France Mobilité? Who's at the top? The Administrative Council. And I should remind you that, in fact, the status has changed. It's become a public administrative authority in 2005, and it's governed by a council of 31 members, which is presided today by Madame Valérie Pécresse, who is the president of the Île-de-France Regional Council. 16 members of the council include 5 representatives from Paris, we have 1 representative from various different bodies. We also have a representative from the Association of Users. And since October 2020, that person has been in position. So when we speak about the actual public transport network that serves the whole region, and which is run by Île-de-France Mobilités, it's made up of trains, metros, trams, and buses. We spoke about new ways of mobility, but today we're focusing on those 5 main divisions. So train, metro, tram, and bus, and train-tram. On the right-hand side of the slide, we speak about billions of trips. For the train, we have 5 rapid regional trains. We have 16 metro lines, 10 tram lines, and more than 1,500 bus lines, divided between buses that serve the Greater Paris region and the buses that serve the Inner Paris region. Let's have a particular focus now on the rapid regional transport rail network. We've got 1,700 kilometers of line in there, which counts more than 4.7 million commutes per day. This particular network has distinctive features, and it's the diversity of its offer, because you have 5 lines of rapid regional rail. That's A, B, C, D, and E. This is the RER. Then you have 8 regional trains, which are all given a letter of the alphabet as well. You have 2 existing lines, which are tram train lines, that's T11 and T4. And also 2 tram train lines which are being built at the moment. We call them T12 and T13, which will be up and running in the coming years. This network serves more than 500 stations, and it's a network which is run by 2 operators, that's the SNCF and the RATP. So what are the main issues on the regional express network for travellers? And these issues are the ones that we have devoted a lot of time and energy to over the last couple of years. So there's a lot of reflection that's gone into this. The first point, obviously, as was mentioned by Laurent, is the continuous improvement of the quality of service that is being provided to travellers. And this means, of course, that we have to develop the offer of services that are provided in the stations. That means renovated stations, stations that are more accessible. And these are for stations, for example, where you have more than 2,500 travellers coming on per day. This is also stations that are more comfortable. So stations that offer more services, more shopping options, more toilets, for example, for people who've reduced mobility, and also intermodal stations that allow a continuity of the actual commute that any particular individual may have between the different modes of transport. We could also add the new services such as bike parking. Now, Île-de-France Mobility also has very strong ambitions for the information that's provided to travellers. And the objective here is to, when we've had meetings, internal meetings, we know that there is a huge expectation to improve that communication, because travellers access the information through many different platforms today. They get it in real time. So the information that we want to provide to traveller has to be reliable, so that we diminish the impact of the stations that are of the situations that may be disturbed. We also want to build the continuity of service in the zones where there is a change between different modes of transport. We also want to enhance the overall offer. We also want to actually take advantage of or to actually get the best out of the service offer in the zones that are not as dense. We also want to be sure that we orient the travellers, and so that the actual load of travellers is broken down in the most logical way between the different modes. And we also want to be able to provide information for everybody and to make that information accessible to everybody, be that persons of reduced mobility or other. Another issue that we have identified as a key issue for us is the modernization of the ticketing system in place. And the last point is we have development projects on infrastructure where we have to adapt the network to new material which is going to come online. I'm speaking in this case of rolling stock in particular. Thank you, Corinne.
Thank you for this presentation, and thank you for setting this scene of the major challenges in terms of the network. Before we go further and we look at the legal framework of this deregulation, Laurent Probst told us earlier, the deregulation of the bus network, but also the preparation for the operating conditions for the Grand Paris Express are crucial elements for the organizing body, because it allowed us to experiment different methods. Could you tell us a little bit more about the situation? Could you take stock on these two deregulation processes, so the bus in the Greater Paris area and the Grand Paris Express? And could you tell us a little bit more about the calendar, the time frame? Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you, Gilles, for this question. Laurent Probst talked about it earlier. He touched upon it, the deregulation of the rail network is not the first phase, because the bus in the Greater Paris area was the one we started with, and the Grand Paris Express as well followed. These two projects are slightly different because we're talking about a different network and different lines. But the Grand Paris Express process, it was about, there were 4 lines. We're looking at 4 lines, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Line 15 is the outskirt line, closer from the center of the city, of the heart of the city. Line 16 going from the north to the northeast of Paris. 17, which will have a common section with line 16, serving the eastern part of the region, slightly further away from the central area. And line 18, which is a line that will liaise Massy and Versailles. So this Grand Paris Express network includes 60 stations. For the most part, they're connected to the heavy rail network. And there are 3 ongoing tenders, as Laurent Probst mentioned it in his introduction, mainly for line 15, because there's a current ongoing process. 16 and 17 are also part of a common process because they have a common section and they'll have the same maintenance workshop, and line 18 as well. These lines, these different lines, are currently part of a deregulation process. It's ongoing, and they will be launched between 2024 to 2030, rather, with the first commissioning for 16 and 17 starting 2024. And then the southern part of the line 15 will start, and then later in the process, line 18 will be commissioned. In the second phase of these deregulation phases, we will have the western section of line 15. But this will be for a later time. Now, let's take a look at the calendar for the deregulation of the Grand Paris network. On this slide here, you can see the different milestones for these 3 groups of lines, if I may say. So the public call for tender is here in blue. So it was the posting for lots 16 and 17, as well as line 18. It will be published at the end of the year for line 18. And then in orange, you have the consultation tender document for the procurement file. Of course, we will amend them as the process goes. With in yellow, the awarding of the operating authority. It will start in the third quarter of 2022 for the first line, and then you have the commissioning dates starting 2024 for lines 16 and 17. Now let's take a look at another mode of transportation for which deregulation has been launched. We're talking here about the bus network, mainly for the Greater Paris area, because the bus network that is currently being operated by RATP is has a calendar that is slightly different. Therefore, the deadline, I believe, is in 2025. The launch of the first process dates back to February 2018. So it's quite recent. It's been 3 years. But given the scope, the volume, and the large network that we have to include in this process, it is a huge success to be able to keep up with this space and the calendar, to keep the timing. On this slide here, you have the different networks that are part of call for tenders processes. We have 36 networks. Here, I know it says 38 on this slide, but it was the initial figure. But because we pulled some networks or some lines with different networks, so finally it's actually 36 networks, but it still gives you an idea of the volume, which is still significant. We've had to work hard in making sure that we had consistency over the servicing of these different regions. We have 120. We wanted to have 120 contracts, and we wanted to lower it to 40 contracts for this region. So we had to work hard in pooling and rationalizing all these stations, all these stops, in order to be as adapted and as relevant as possible for these networks. So we wanted to produce differently and increase service quality as well as performance for all these different areas. In orange, you have the consultation files that have already been sent out. In green are the contracts that have already been awarded, but I know that Laurent Probst mentioned it in his word of introduction, and the process which will continue throughout 2022. Thank you very much, Corinne, for reminding us of these two, the bus and Grand Paris Express deregulation processes. Now let's go back to the core of this session. We want to talk about the deregulation of the rail transportation network. We know that there's already a lot to talk about. I know it started in Brussels and then it was transcribed into the national context. We'd like to know a little bit more about how the strategy was defined for this deregulation. Again, I'll give you the floor for this quick reminder of the different milestones, as well as a recap of the major objectives in terms of deregulation for the railway network. Thank you, Gilles. I'll try to be as brief as possible on this because these elements come from the European context as provisioned by the European Commission. You should be aware of this, including foreign operators who are with us today from behind their screens. So the deregulation process was initiated by Europe. It started in 1991 and it was incremental. So we're looking at 4 packages, railway packages. The first one dates back to 2001, rather, with the different modalities for preparing of the deregulation of international combined freight transportation. So it really started with goods and freight at a macro level. Second step was 2004, rather, with the second rail package. We could see that things were starting to become more dense. So it was focusing on combined freight transportation to competition both internationally and domestically, with the creation of the European Railway Agency and a national authority in charge of network safety as well as interoperability. 2007, again, another milestone. We're getting closer and closer to passenger travels, because this is in 2007 was about opening up the networks of international passenger transportation and the authorization of cabotage on the national territories. So we can see that we're getting closer and closer to the current situation. And finally, 2016, the fourth rail package, which was about the completion of the deregulation of the rail transport to. So we had goods at the international level, then goods at the national level, then passengers at international level, and here we are, we're looking at passenger transportation at regional level, which is exactly why we're here today. Now, with regards to the different terms as described by this fourth package, the dates that we had were January 1st, 2020 at the latest for commercial and national lines, and the awarding of public service contracts for regional transport services at the latest on January 1st, 2023. So these are deadlines, general deadlines, but given the different specificities of the Île-de-France region, we have our own calendar. So this is a calendar for the deregulation of passenger transportation in the Île-de-France region. It was defined by the law for un nouveau pacte ferroviaire, a new railway deal in 2018. So for the Transilien line, except for the RER, it was defined by the Île-de-France Mobilités and should run from January 1st, 2023, and at the latest on December 31st, 2032. And as I said, given the complexity of this network with a lot of interconnections, it's a very dense network. It doesn't seem realistic to us at least, to create a deregulation process for all lines at the same time. So just a quick reminder for the different deadlines that we have based on the different lines operated by Île-de-France Mobilité for the Transilien and Tram-Train. So it does not include RER lines. The deregulation process will start between 2023 and 2032. As for the rail transport services that are part of the regional express network operated on lines whose infrastructure has been extended and put into service as of January 1st, 2018. So basically, this is targeting the RERE. Let's make it clear. So the deregulation will span over 2035 to 2019. As for RERC and RERD that are only operated by SNCF, it will start in between 2033 and 2039. As for RERA and RERB that are co-operated by RATP SNCF, it will start in 2040. This calendar is actually aligned with the deregulation process of the metro. So this calendar really spans of about 10 years, basically. As for the strategy of Île-de-France Mobilité,
so first of all, it's important to remind ourselves that this is a legal obligation, in fact, but which also corresponds to a political objective. The first objective is this improvement of the quality of service provided to travellers. It's important to remind us of that fact. The objective is to refocus all of expectations on the traveller and put the traveller at the centre of the transport network. It is also an objective to accompany on a daily basis the territories, the different local authorities, by guaranteeing a reliability of service. We have some territories or areas that are particularly dense, where 80% of the territory corresponds also to rural areas. So the reliability of the service is absolutely essential. There's also the optimization of the economic performance in order to make these lines, in fact, generate profit that can be reinvested in the development of the offer. And there is also a willingness to assert the role of the organizing authority ourselves. So to make this successful, this deregulation process, the strategic orientation of Île-de-France Mobilités is to actually commit ourselves resolutely in the process to open up to competition in a progressive and transparent manner, whilst guaranteeing at the same time fairness between potential candidates, potential applicants, potential tenderers. As the General Director said it in his introductory speech. We also want to favour the intensity of this competition, to have as many applicants as possible, so that we can have a real choice. And to do this, we need to help all of these applicants and to give them all the available information needed in order to submit the most reliable and solid tenders that they can. We also committed to create favourable conditions for a full and complete deregulation by removing any barriers to access to the market. So this is the specific deal, the way in which the rolling stock is dealt with, the way rolling stock is recycled, the way depots are run, the maintenance workshops. And we also need to be successful in these in the transition phases by guaranteeing, in fact, a transparent switchover for the traveller, and give the traveller some visibility on the social framework which is applicable to all the employees involved in the operators who run these lines today. So, where have we arrived at today, in fact, in this plan? The initial decision to deregulate as of 2023 dates back to the Administrative Council of Île-de-France Mobilités on the 5th of February last year. The decision was actually taken at that meeting, and immediately afterwards, in April, there was a publication of the notice of pre-information for the full Île-de-France network. A couple of months afterwards, in June, we spoke about internally the possible division into lots, and with the objective of proposing to the Administrative Council in December a scenario which could be validated and approved. We organized also some days in June in last year with various operators. We actually heard submissions from 9 transport operators during these days between 22nd and 25th of June. And then we continued our process of designing the whole scenario internally. And this was presented and approved by the Administrative Council on the 9th of December 2020. In October 2020, we adopted the plan for the management of this information, which is covered by the business secret law, so that all the data could be exchanged, in fact, going forward. So The perspectives for 2021, following the publication of the different lots, this notification of pre-information was modified in January, and the actual final division into lots was specified. So today, on the 10th of March 2021, it's the second star on the timeline at the bottom. This is the day of information for operators. The next step will be the approval of the choice of the mode of management by the Board of Directors in April. Right after that, in May, we will publish the notice of call for tenders for the first lot. This is for mid-2021. Thank you. Do you have anything else to add? Or is it okay for this? It's fine for me on that point. I'm not going to hog the microphone. The stakes for us, I don't want to develop it right now because there's a lot that could be said and a lot that we don't need to get into. There will perhaps be questions. I would like to remind you at this point that you will be able to ask your questions later in the coming hour. And at the end of this presentation, you will be able to take the microphone yourself and to ask your questions directly. So now we're going to continue specifically by specifying the scenario for division into lots, for the division for the awarding perhaps of the actual lines, the rail lines, and the calendar for the calls for tenders. So I'm going to ask Miriam McNee to give us some details on this calendar, because there are different phases depending on whether it's an RER, rapid rail, or if it's metro. So could you present us this calendar, this scenario for deregulation? Thank you, Gilles. Hello, everybody. I would like to present the scenario that was validated during the Board of Directors meeting in December. This is the scenario that we worked on during 2020, as Corinne reminded us. So it's a calendar or a schedule which mentions again the actual awarding for each lot of lines. It's ambitious. It's both ambitious and progressive, I would like to say. It's over 10 years. So these are procedures that are going to start in 2021 and that are going to continue until 2034. So it also indicates our willingness to actually really go to full deregulation whilst taking into account certain restrictions, certain technical specifications, which I would like to come back to later on. So this particular schedule, as presented to you today, we're going to open up the market to competition with 2 lines for 2024-2025. These are 2 lots of tram trains. These are the simplest lines to operate, and they're the ones that are less connected or less interlinked with the rest of the network. This first one is T4 and T11. This is on the branch Esbly-Crécy, and they will be opened up to competition on 2022 for operation in 2024. Now I'm going to come back speak about this lot again later in the presentation. A second lot of lines made up of 2 tram train lines that are being built at the moment. That's T12 and T13. These are express trams. These will be commissioned in end of 2024, beginning 2025. And then starting in 2024, we're going to attack these heavier lines, these lines that actually run out of Paris Saint-Lazare station, line J and line L. These are quite massive lines. For the rest of the calendar, we have lines N and U, which serve more the west of the Île-de-France region. So this is Paris and West Paris, and this is for 2027 commissioning. There's also line R, which would be on the same calendar, but there is a bit of a time slippage on that one, because it won't be up and running until 2027. In 2028, we will be opening up line P and the RER E. And it may be a bit ambitious, because we want to start at the end of 2025 designating the operator for operation in 2028, but we're going to go forward with that. H and K will be a little bit later, 1 year later, to open up in 2029, and then finally we have RER D and C, which are much later, in 2031, for operation for RER C in 2034. In relation to the criteria which have been taken into account in the awarding on the breakdown of the calendar, we tried to refocus on certain criteria, whilst bearing in mind that it is quite complicated due to the density of the Île-de-France network. It's difficult to actually meet all the criteria, but we selected some criteria that we thought were the most important, and these have been confirmed by the returns that we had actually from the operators that we spoke to, the 9 that we spoke to in June 2020. The first point is the limiting of the level of coactivity in the stations and along the line. And that's what actually made us to start, in fact, opening up the market with a simple line, because it doesn't have that vast number of interconnections with other parts of the network. The coactivity along the line is inevitable, because otherwise it's going to slow down other deregulation lines. The second criteria, which actually made us dimension our whole project, is the characteristics of the maintenance system of the rolling stock. We want to limit or to reduce to a minimum the coactivity within a same maintenance site. So lines H and K, for example, will be regrouped, will be brought together so that the maintenance will be shared. The other two criteria is the state of the rolling stock, the fleet of rolling stock. This was a determining factor. Given the policy of Île-de-France Mobilités, which is to renew the rolling stock over the last years, but we have actually a fleet which is quite new today and which has been renovated on the whole network. And that allows us to have a system which is rather reliable and rather dependable. And then the last criteria is the level of resilience or robustness and the performance of the line, which we actually defined looking at the volume and the impact of any renovation and also the state of the infrastructure. The volume of renovation works is quite significant in Île-de-France, so our objective here was to reduce the impact of this in the context of this opening up to opening up the market. Thank you for that calendar. We saw on the previous slide that it was going to go very, very fast, in fact, now, this schedule. So December 2023, it's in less than 3 years now for the first lot, T4, T11, on Ebly-Crécy. So we need to see how you're going to organize that. And could you actually give us some details now about this particular lot? What are the actual characteristics of this lot?
Of these lines, what is the calendar? With a precise calendar for the award of the operator in 2022. So could you focus on this first lot? I think it would be particularly interesting for those of you who are watching us to see how this deregulation process will become tangible in the coming weeks. Yes, Gilles, thank you. As you said, the calendar is rather dense, but we're very ambitious for this first lot. This lot is, if we compare to the other lines of the Transilien network, it's quite consistent in terms of operation and in terms of interface with the other lines of the Transilien network. So it's both large with a large volume, 2.9 million kilometer commercial trains, so it's significant, and at the same time it's still reasonable, which is probably the reason why we decided to choose this lot. With a rolling stock fleet, which will be coherent when the deregulation will start, because Île-de-France Mobilités has decided to replace the T4 lines with Dualis tracks. So all 3 lines will benefit from Dualis tracks with new Dualis trains, rather. And they'll have dedicated infrastructures, namely for T4 and T11, and we'll look at the ambitions that we have with this dedicated infrastructure. And as I was saying, there's a very little connection with the other lines. Just a few key figures: 2.9 million commercial trains per kilometer per year, so it represents about 4.5% of the Île-de-France rail network operated by SNCF, and about 70,000 trips per day. So of course these figures date back to before the COVID crisis, and of course before the commissioning of the new branch of section on T4. Now more specifically, let's take a look at each line, especially for those of you who don't know the Île-de-France region. T4 is a line which is made up of 2 sections. So the historical one on the national network from Bondy to Aulnay-sous-Bois. And the second, so the new branch, which was commissioned at the end of 2019, from Gargan to Hôpital de Montfermeil. It serves the Seine-Saint-Denis region. The offer on T4 is we have about 7 minutes in rush hour, so about 9 minutes between each train outside of rush hour. The train sets are maintained in the Tram-Train Noisy-le-Sec workshop. So in the same workshop as T11 and Île-de-Crécy. So T11, it's a tram-train line that is quite recent. It was commissioned in July 2017. It serves the northern part of the Île-de-France region, still in the Seine-Saint-Denis department, between Épinay and Le Bourget. 7 different stations spanning across 11 kilometers. During rush hour, we have about 5-minute waiting time between two trains and between 10 and 15 minutes outside of rush hour. With Dualis train sets, again, they're maintained in the same workshop, the tram train workshop. As for the Esbly-Crécy line P, it's currently managed by line P of the Transilien, but it's actually operated as a tram train on a tram train model maintained in Noisy, just like a T4 and T11, which probably guided our decision to pull it with T4 and T11 as part of this lot. In terms of volume of train and passengers, it's not as significant as T4 and T11. So we're looking at 2 trains per hour during rush hour and 1 per hour outside of rush hour per direction. So this is again in the Greater Paris region. Now let's take a look at the different milestones for this first lot. We have different deadlines with clear restrictions because we have 16-month legal period to allow for the transfer of staff. So December 2023 will be the first train that will run on these lines. The first operator for these lines will have to be awarded by mid-2022. So if we look at the calendar, we are going to publish the notice of the procurement file mid-2021. So the tender file, consultation files. So this means that we will have to launch the notice for call for tender in May 2021 and approve the management mode choice during the meeting on April 14th. So it will come very soon. I don't want to talk about the notices that were published in April 2020. They were very vague, and then it was amended in July 2020. It was for all the lots, so the scenario as voted by the board on December 9th. Now, for the management method and the choice regarding this management, we know that this is the most pressing item on our agenda. We have been working on it a lot these past few weeks. And as I said, this choice needs to be approved by the board in April. We still have a few pending items to make this decision, including the fact that we still have reflection underway with SNCF Réseau on the operating and the maintenance of tram train lines T4 and T11. Like I said, they have their own dedicated infrastructure, and they are operated. So since 2017, they have been part of the decree related to safety and of guided public transportation called STPG, which allows for the infrastructure manager to delegate some of its missions to the rail operator. So they can, for instance, delegate the management of the maintenance of the infrastructure. So for these 2 lines, T4 and T11, SNCF Réseau has told us that they would like to delegate these missions to the future operator. So the maintenance and the operational management of T4, which means that on the operational side of things, you will have an operator that will also do maintenance. It's really interesting for us in terms of operation, and we believe that this is relevant, especially for Île-de-France Mobilités, but also for the future operator, because this way there will be less interface with the EGI. We believe that this model would be really interesting, especially because here we're talking about the tram train lines, and it's probably not as complex as other lines. However, the implementation of this contract, this type of contract, is would be something quite new for us, and this would require cooperation with SNCF Réseau on setting up a new contract, new type of contract. So we're currently considering 2 different scenarios in order to allow us to award these lines to an operator slash a company that could do maintenance as well. We have people from the Gare and Connection. We have a few people here who would be more than happy to answer any question you may have on the specific issue related to infrastructure. We have experts who can answer your question if you have questions on this issue. Well, yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes. As it was just said, you can ask any question you may have. We thought it was important for us to address this because this model is something that will have an impact on the management method choice and, of course, the different missions that will be requested from the operator on these lines. And now, to prepare this process, we'll still have a few items to define, especially with regards to the missions that will be awarded to the authority in terms of safety, in terms of station management, passenger management. We have a decree on stations that we are waiting for, and this should allow us to have better visibility on some aspects. We still need to work on the organizational chart between the different stakeholders in the sector. So between the Île-de-France Mobility, the contract holder, and the SNCF Réseau and Gare and Connexion, which manage the infrastructures as well as the stations. Thank you very much. Thank you for this presentation. It was very detailed, very comprehensive. I know that we're looking at, we're really experimenting. At the same time, it's very real, very tangible for these tram train lines. And I'm sure that we will have questions on why we decided to change this traditional limit between operators and maintenance operator companies, rather. So I think now's the time to conclude this informational session. I'm sure that we could have a lot more questions to address, but I do believe that we have been able to cover a lot of ground. This is exactly what we are here. This is what we organized this type of information session, to be able to cover different aspects, infrastructure, IT system, rolling stock, etc. This is what we've covered today, and Jean-Louis Perrin, Deputy General Director of IDFM, can take the floor to talk a little bit about this new start, this fresh start in terms of call for tenders. If you'll allow me, I'll do just like Jean Castex, Prime Minister. For the last 2 minutes, I will remove my face mask. I'll put it back on later on. Just as a word of conclusion, I'd like to say that I was really happy to be with you, with all of you. We're numerous, and we know that this is just the beginning of a very long phase. I know that we didn't have too many questions today. We were really happy to have launched this meeting. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to gather all of you in the same room, and as soon as the health situation improves, we will be happy to see you face to face. I hope that today we have showed and showcased our willingness to launch this call for tender process. You may have read a few articles in the press, in the media, but the board has a strong political desire and willpower that has been visible throughout the whole process, with clear ambitions. We want things to go fast and to have cascading effects. We have this strong intellectual stimulation. We are very proactive, as Corinne Montmory. She was nominated with her team, Ryan McNee, and other people who were present today with the general direction. We have decided to put into place within my department, but also the other departments that will follow up on this project, about 40 people. This is how much energy and how many people we want to feed into this process, because we know that this will be a very long-term process. Again, thank you, everyone. I don't want to sound like I won an Oscar, but I would like to thank SNCF Réseau. You've been here since day one, since we started talking about competition, and to talk about it. Service SNCF has come up to us. Patricia Delon with the dedicated services, who's now in charge of passenger services, if I remember correctly, who came up to us. I don't remember her exact position, and I apologize. Isabelle Don, that's her name. Yes, General Director for Customers and Services. She supported us, and her team supported us as well. So I would like to thank her for that. And we know that for deregulation, there are two aspects. So technical data related to infrastructure. This is why we need you, and you've been supporting us all along. And we'll have a second section, and I would like to thank SNCF Voyageurs, because we will need social data. This is important for the success of such a process. As we said, we'd like everything to be done as part of the legal framework that is, of course, ongoing, but with we want to really take care of railway staff, regardless of which operator is selected. I would like to thank our historical partners that we're used to working with, and I would like to thank the different operators, the operators that were used to working on buses, but who are interested in the rail network. And I would like to thank the newcomers. I'm really happy to see that we have a few newcomers who have ventured into this new adventure, even remotely. I would like also to thank the teams for organizing this type of meeting. I know it's not nearly as easy as organizing a session, a hybrid session such as this one. We try to make it work as much as possible and to give you as many information as possible. I would like to thank Gilles Mansart, who's always in it with us. Thank you for being the moderator of this session. Thank you for asking very relevant questions, sometimes a bit challenging questions, as you know, but it really allows us to move forward. I would like to thank all of you. At the beginning of the session, Laurent Probst gave us an introduction. He talked about the challenges and the targets that he had. He wanted us to talk about the lots and the calendar for the next few years. I think this is exactly what we did, and we wanted to also talk about visibility. We know that submitting an offer to do a call for tender is something that requires means, energy, human and financial resources, and having a clear vision on the process is a way for you to prepare yourselves as well as your teams to know how you can prepare, how you can submit this offer, to have a long-term visibility, not only on the short term. And of course, and this is the only regret that I have, unfortunately, we have a lot of people behind their screens today. But for us, it's also a way to assess your interest in these call for tenders. And I'm entirely sure that in the coming weeks and months, we'll have more discussions with you to assess this interest and to answer any question you may have. This process is going to be a very long process. This is just the beginning. We just got engaged, if I may. We have about 10 to 15 years ahead of us. Maybe we'll have a few brides, but we will see, and we count on you for these next steps. And we're counting on you for the first step, because when you're running a race, hurdles, you need to start somewhere. And we believe that this first step is a good way to showcase that the fact that we have the strong belief that we will be able to create the stimulation amongst operators in order to, in fine, offer better services to our users, which is our end goal. Thank you very much on this. I would like to thank you all. I know that we will have a new meeting very soon. I don't know that a date has been set, but of course we will keep you informed as the process goes on. Thank you very much.